New Year's Eve is supposed to be a time of celebration, of fresh starts and new beginnings. But for some, it's the start of something far darker. Tonight, we bring you 4 terrifying slasher tales where the hunt is relentless, the fear is palpable, and survival is anything but guaranteed. From shadowy stalkers to deadly party crashers, these stories will have you questioning who's watching and who's waiting. Welcome to Dark Tales Daily. The countdown begins now. The Silent Passenger. It was just past midnight when Emily finally left her friend's New Year's Eve party. The roads were empty, the celebrations winding down, and the cold January air bit through her coat as she unlocked her car. A few lingering fireworks burst in the distance, their colors reflecting in the puddles on the street. She slid into the driver's seat, tossing her purse onto the passenger side. Her car's engine groaned to life, and the warmth of the heater slowly crept in. The drive home wasn't far, just a quiet stretch of country roads leading to her small apartment complex. But as she pulled onto the main road, she noticed something in her rearview mirror, a pair of headlights. At first, it didn't bother her. It wasn't unusual to see another car this late, and she figured it was just someone else heading home. But the car didn't pass her, even when she slowed down. It stayed a perfect distance behind her, the headlights bright and unwavering. She turned onto a side road just to see if it would follow. It did. A knot formed in her stomach, but she shook it off. "You're being paranoid," she thought. "It's just a coincidence." To calm herself, she turned on the radio, letting the soft hum of music fill the car. She glanced in the mirror again. The car was still there, maintaining the same distance. Emily's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She decided to test it. At the next turn, she made a sharp left, onto a narrower road that wasn't part of her usual route. The headlights behind her followed, now closer than before. Her heart pounded. "Okay, this is not normal," she muttered under her breath. She reached for her phone to call someone, anyone, but it wasn't in her purse. A sinking feeling hit her as she remembered leaving it on the kitchen counter at her friend's house. The road ahead stretched into darkness, the streetlights becoming fewer and far between. The car behind her suddenly turned off its headlights, vanishing into the night. Emily gasped, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. She couldn't see anything behind her now, just the empty blackness of the road. Maybe they turned off, or stopped. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, but the silence in the car felt oppressive now, the soft music from the radio no longer comforting. She glanced at the mirror again. Nothing. Then there was a sound, a faint rustling from the back seat. Her breath caught in her throat. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was jumping to conclusions. But the sound came again, louder this time, like fabric brushing against leather. Emily's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but the back seat was shrouded in shadow. Slowly, with trembling hands, she adjusted the mirror to get a better view. At first, she saw nothing, just the dark outline of the seats. But then, in the faint glow of passing streetlights, she saw it, a shape, a person, sitting silently in the back seat, their face obscured but their presence undeniable. She screamed, the car swerving as she lost control for a moment. Her tires screeched on the pavement, but she managed to steady the vehicle. The figure didn't move. Emily's mind raced. What do I do? Do I stop? Do I keep driving? Her pulse thundered in her ears as she glanced at the mirror again. The figure was still there, sitting perfectly still, as if waiting. Desperation took over. She slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop on the side of the road. Without thinking, she grabbed her keys and threw open the door, stumbling out into the cold night air. She turned to look at the back seat, expecting the figure to come after her. But the car was empty. Confused and trembling, she approached cautiously, her breath visible in the icy air. She opened the back door, her hands shaking, but there was nothing there. The seat was empty, untouched. Was I imagining it? She wondered, her heart still racing. She stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then she heard it, a footstep behind her. She spun around, but no one was there. The road was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Her breath quickened, and she turned back toward her car, desperate to leave. That's when she saw him. Standing just behind the driver's side door was a man, his face hidden beneath a hood. In one hand he held a knife, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. He tilted his head as if studying her. Emily didn't have time to think. She bolted, running as fast as her legs would carry her, her shoes slipping on the icy road. Behind her she could hear his footsteps, slow, deliberate, unhurried, like he knew there was nowhere for her to go. The road ahead seemed endless, the darkness closing in around her. Her lungs burned, her legs screaming for relief, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the headlights of an approaching car. She woke in the hospital, her body aching and her mind foggy. A nurse told her she had been found unconscious on the side of the road, lucky to have been spotted by a passing driver. They didn't find anyone else, though, the nurse added. Just you. Emily wanted to believe it was over, that she was safe now. But as she lay there, staring at the ceiling, she felt it again, that oppressive weight, like someone was watching her. And then, from the shadows of the room, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps. The cabin in the snow. The trip had been Lily's idea. A New Year's weekend getaway to a remote cabin in the mountains. No phones, no stress, just friends and snow. The others had been hesitant at first, but the thought of ringing in the new year with laughter and hot cocoa by the fire was too tempting to resist. By the time they arrived, the snowstorm had already rolled in, blanketing the forest in thick white silence. The cabin itself was rustic but cozy, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. It felt like the perfect escape. But by the second night, the isolation didn't feel so charming anymore. It started with the footprints. The 4 of them, Lily, Max, Emma, and Noah, had spent the day sledding and drinking spiked hot chocolate. By evening, they were ready to collapse. As Max stoked the fire, Emma glanced out the frost-covered window. "Hey, guys," she said, her voice uncertain. "Did one of you go outside after we came in?" The others looked up from their cards, shaking their heads. "Why?" Noah asked. "There are footprints in the snow," Emma said, pointing, "leading up to the door." Everyone rushed to the window. Sure enough, fresh tracks led directly to the cabin's front porch, large, heavy footprints that didn't belong to any of them. "What the hell?" Max muttered, pulling on his boots. "It's probably just some hiker who got lost. I'll check." "No," Lily's voice was sharp. "Don't open the door." Max paused, his hand on the knob. "It's fine. Whoever it was probably just needed help and moved on. Look, the tracks don't go back. They probably walked around the side of the cabin." But they hadn't. When they checked the windows on the other side, there were no footprints leading away. The tracks stopped at the porch, right at the front door. That night, no one slept well. The wind howled outside, rattling the old cabin's windows. The fire burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Lily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the old wood. Every sound made her stomach tighten. Just as she started to drift off, a loud thud jolted her upright. "What was that?" Emma whispered from the bed across the room. "Probably snow falling off the roof," Lily said, though her voice lacked conviction. She didn't move, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. Then came another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. Lily grabbed her phone, but there was no signal, not even a single bar. "Guys," she hissed, shaking Emma awake. "Someone's outside." The two of them crept to the bedroom door, peeking out into the dimly lit living room. Max and Noah were already there, standing by the window. Max held the fireplace poker like a weapon, his jaw clenched. "There's no one there," Max said, his breath visible in the icy air. The fire had nearly gone out, and the room felt unnaturally cold. "Did you check the door?" Lily asked. Max shook his head. "I'm not opening that door." The thudding came again, this time louder, as if something heavy was being dragged across the porch. The sound sent chills down Lily's spine. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now." "In this storm," Noah said, "we'll freeze to death before we even reach the car." Another thud. Then a low, guttural sound, a noise that didn't sound human. Emma whimpered, backing away from the window. "It's not just the wind," she said. "There's something out there." Suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Everyone froze, staring as it twisted slowly, deliberately. Max raised the poker, his hands shaking. "Get back," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The rattling stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, with a deafening crash, the door burst open. The wind howled as snow swirled into the room, but no one was standing in the doorway. The porch was empty, the footprints covered by fresh snowfall. Max moved forward cautiously, stepping onto the porch. "Max, don't!" Lily shouted. He didn't listen. He stepped outside, turning his head to scan the darkness. The wind roared, making it hard to hear, but Lily thought she caught something, a faint, high-pitched laugh, almost childlike. Then the door slammed shut, trapping Max outside. "No!" Lily screamed, rushing to open it, but the knob wouldn't budge. It was locked. From the inside, the lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. Emma screamed as a loud bang came from the back of the cabin, followed by heavy footsteps. "They're inside," Noah shouted, grabbing a knife from the kitchen. The four of them huddled together in the living room, their breaths quick and panicked. The footsteps grew louder, circling them, but no one could see anything in the pitch black. Then the laughter came again, closer this time. Lily fumbled for her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. She swept it across the room, stopping on the far corner. Her heart dropped. A figure stood there, tall and hunched, its face obscured by a crude burlap mask. Its head tilted unnaturally, like a predator sizing up its prey. In one hand it held an axe, the blade glinting in the faint light. The figure moved fast, lunging toward them with inhuman speed. Lily screamed, pushing Emma out of the way as the axe came down, splintering the coffee table. Noah swung the knife wildly, but the figure seemed unfazed, its heavy breathing filling the room. "Run!" Lily shouted, grabbing Emma's arm and dragging her toward the back door. They burst into the snow-covered night, the cold air biting at their skin. Behind them, the cabin echoed with shouts and crashing furniture. The last thing Lily heard before they disappeared into the trees was Noah's scream. They ran blindly through the snow, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling. The wind howled, carrying with it the faint sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. And the laughter, always the laughter. By the time they reached the car, Lily's hands were numb. She fumbled with the keys, her vision blurred by tears. "Hurry!" Emma cried, glancing over her shoulder. Lily got the door open and they scrambled inside. She turned the key, the engine roaring to life. Relief washed over her until she looked in the rearview mirror. The masked figure sat in the back seat, the axe resting on its lap. The New Year's party crasher. It was supposed to be the perfect New Year's Eve. Friends, music, drinks. What more could anyone want? The party at Chloe's house was in full swing, the bass from the speakers reverberating through the walls. Everyone was there, packed into the cozy house with fairy lights strung across the ceiling and balloons drifting lazily on the floor. Alex had been looking forward to this night for weeks. It was a break from the monotony of work, a chance to let loose and start the new year on a high note. But as the clock inched closer to midnight, something felt off. The first sign was the uninvited guest. Alex noticed him lingering near the snack table, his back turned to the crowd. He wore a black hoodie, the hood pulled up so that his face was obscured. It wasn't unusual for Chloe's parties to have a few crashers, friends of friends who tagged along, but this guy didn't seem to fit. He wasn't drinking or talking to anyone. He just stood there, unmoving. Alex nudged Chloe. "Hey, do you know that guy?" She glanced over, frowning. "No, must be a friend of someone else." But no one else seemed to know him either. Every time Alex asked around, they got the same answer. "I thought he came with you." By the time the countdown to midnight began, the stranger was gone, and Alex convinced himself he'd just been overthinking it. He grabbed a drink and joined the others in the living room, laughing and cheering as everyone shouted, 10, 9, 8. The lights went out at 3. The house was plunged into darkness, the music cutting off abruptly. Someone screamed, followed by nervous laughter. "Relax," Chloe's voice called out. "Probably just the breaker." But when Alex pulled out his phone for light, he realized the house wasn't completely dark. In the faint glow of the streetlights outside, he saw the front door. It was wide open. "Did someone leave?" Chloe asked, stepping toward the door. "No," Alex said quickly, grabbing her arm. "Wait." His heart was pounding now, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He turned, scanning the room. The crowd was murmuring, people pulling out their phones to light the space. That's when Alex noticed it. The back door leading to the kitchen was open too. Someone was inside the house. "Chloe, lock the doors," Alex said, his voice low. "Now." The next few minutes were chaos. Chloe tried to calm everyone down, but panic was setting in. Alex moved through the crowd, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He thought of the man in the hoodie. Where had he gone? And why had no one seen him leave? The first scream came from upstairs. Alex froze as everyone turned toward the staircase. "Stay here," he said, though his own voice trembled. Slowly he climbed the steps, his phone held out in front of him. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the air felt colder the higher he went. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. "Hello?" Alex called, his voice shaking. "Who's up here?" The only answer was a faint, wet sound, like something being dragged across the floor. The light from his phone illuminated a smear of red on the hardwood. His stomach dropped as he followed the trail to a closed door. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he reached out, his hand trembling as he pushed the door open. Inside was the first body, a girl from the party, her face pale and lifeless, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Blood pooled around her, soaking into the rug. Alex staggered back, nearly dropping his phone. "Oh my God," he whispered. He turned to run, but a shadow moved at the end of the hall. The man in the hoodie stood there, motionless, his head tilted slightly as if curious. Alex's heart raced as he stumbled back down the stairs. "Someone's dead," he shouted. "We have to get out of here." Panic erupted. People rushed for the doors, but they wouldn't budge. The locks had been tampered with, the windows nailed shut. The partygoers screamed and banged on the walls, their fear spiraling into chaos. And then, through the noise, came a sound that silenced everyone. The slow, deliberate scrape of a knife against the wall. The lights flickered back on, revealing the man in the hoodie standing in the center of the room. He held a long, gleaming blade, the front of his sweatshirt darkened with blood. For a moment, no one moved. Then he lunged. Screams filled the house as people scattered. Alex grabbed Chloe's hand, pulling her toward the kitchen. "We need a weapon," he said, his voice frantic. "Anything." They found a knife block, grabbing what they could, but the screams from the other room were already fading, replaced by eerie silence. Alex peeked out, his breath catching in his throat. Bodies littered the floor. The man was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Chloe whispered, clutching the knife tightly. "I don't know," Alex said. His voice broke. "We need to—" The words died in his throat as a shadow moved behind Chloe. "Run!" he screamed, shoving her forward just as the blade came down. Chloe shrieked, stumbling into the hallway as Alex turned to face the killer. He swung wildly with the knife, but the man dodged easily, his movements unnaturally quick. Alex barely had time to react before the blade slashed across his arm, sending him crashing to the ground. Chloe made it to the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock. She didn't care about the blood on her hands or the screams behind her. She just had to get out. Finally, the lock gave way and the door burst open. She ran into the snow-covered street, her breath visible in the icy air. Turning back, she saw the man standing in the doorway, his knife dripping with blood. And then he tilted his head again, as if savoring the moment, before stepping back into the shadows of the house. The police found the scene hours later. Of the 20 people at the party, only 2 bodies were recovered. Alex's was not one of them. The Masked Stalker. It was supposed to be just a casual New Year's stroll through the park. The city had quieted after the midnight fireworks, and the cool night air was refreshing. The 4 of us, Maya, James, Rachel, and I, had been inseparable for years, and we laughed as we reminisced about all the ridiculous things that had happened that night. The park was nearly empty, the paths illuminated by dim, flickering lamps. A light mist clung to the ground, swirling around our feet as we walked. It felt peaceful, until Rachel stopped walking. "Guys," she said, her voice low, "I think someone's following us." We turned, but the path behind us was empty, just the faint glow of the lamps stretching into the distance. James laughed. "Come on, Rach. Don't start with the creepy stuff. It's New Year's. No one's out stalking people tonight." But Rachel didn't laugh. "I'm serious. I thought I saw someone. Back there, near the trees." We waited for a moment, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. Shrugging it off, we kept walking, our conversation picking up again. But the carefree mood was gone. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, and I wasn't the only one. A few minutes later, we heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, echoing softly against the gravel path behind us. Maya froze, her hand gripping my arm. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We all turned again, straining to see into the shadows. And then, under the weak light of a street lamp, we saw him. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the path, partially obscured by the mist. He was tall and motionless, wearing a plain white mask that covered his face completely. The mask had no expression, just 2 empty eye holes that seemed to stare right at us. "Who the hell is that?" James muttered, stepping forward. "Don't," Rachel hissed, grabbing his arm. "Let's just go." We turned and quickened our pace, the sound of our footsteps crunching against the gravel filling the air. I fought the urge to look back, my pulse pounding in my ears. But then I heard it again. The footsteps. They were faster now, matching our pace. My breath hitched as I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was closer, his white mask gleaming in the pale light. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just walked, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as if he knew we couldn't escape. "Run!" Maya shouted, breaking into a sprint. The rest of us followed, our feet pounding against the path as we darted through the park. The mist seemed thicker now, clinging to us like it was trying to slow us down. We reached a fork in the path and split up, Rachel and James going one way, Maya and I taking the other. "We'll meet at the parking lot," I shouted, but I wasn't sure if they heard me. Maya and I didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the park. We bent over, gasping for air, our breaths visible in the frigid air. "Did we lose him?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I didn't believe them. We stood there for a moment, the silence oppressive. Then, from somewhere in the distance, we heard a scream. "Rachel!" Maya grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to help them." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We have to get out of here." Before we could decide, the sound of footsteps returned. They were louder this time, closer. And then, through the mist, the masked figure emerged. He stood under a nearby lamp, the light casting long shadows across the ground. In his hand, he held something, a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. He tilted his head slightly, as if amused by our fear, and started walking toward us. I grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her toward the parking lot. The car was just ahead, the only vehicle left in the lot. My shaking hands fumbled with the keys as I unlocked the doors. We scrambled inside, locking the doors behind us. The masked figure stepped into the lot, his slow, deliberate pace never changing. He stopped in front of the car, staring at us through the windshield. Maya was sobbing, her hands pressed against her mouth. "What does he want?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice cracking, "but we're not staying to find out." I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. But before I could shift into gear, something moved in the back seat. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head, dreading what I knew I would see. The masked figure was in the back seat, his empty eyes staring at me through the mirror. I didn't have time to react before he lunged, the knife slashing downward. When I woke, the car was empty. The windshield was cracked, and the driver's side door hung open. Maya was gone. I stumbled out into the parking lot, blood dripping down my arm. The mist had thickened, the park now completely silent. I screamed her name, but the only response was the faint echo of my voice. Then I saw them. Footprints in the snow leading back into the park. And the laughter. It started softly, almost a whisper, but it grew louder, echoing all around me. High-pitched and unnatural, it sent shivers down my spine. I turned, searching for the source, but there was no one there. And then, just beyond the edge of the lot, I saw him. The masked figure stood motionless, the knife dangling from his hand. His head tilted again, that same eerie, taunting gesture. I ran. The police never found Maya, or James, or Rachel. They told me I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. Not when I know he's still out there. Not when I know he's still watching. Some celebrations end in cheers and laughter, but not everyone makes it to the new year. Tonight's stories remind us that danger can strike when you least expect it, turning a fresh start into a fight for survival. Will you be ready if the shadows come for you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us tomorrow for more chilling tales on Dark Tales Daily. And until then, Happy New Year.